Welcome back to the Fantasy Rugby Draft podcast. Thanks for downloading and listening. I'm Bruce Wilkinson, and joining me in the booth we have a special guest. We have the Right Honourable Reg Roberts. Welcome.
Hey Bruce, good to see you, mate.
Excellent. Reg is all things Australian rugby, from starring, I can say star, can't I? Starring on the Green and Gold Rugby podcast.
I can hear the inverted commas around the word starring, but go for it.
You also did a bit of work last season with Fantasy Fox Sports as a fantasy columnist. Looked pretty good. Very impressed.
Stumbled through a few columns there, mate.
Yeah, nicely done. Welcome back, Reg. It's really good to have you back. We're going to run through the Aussie conference. There's quite a bit of change, and not just with down one team. There's a few personnel changes, a few coach changes. We're going to see what impact that has for Fantasy Rugby Draft. Quick reminder how to contact us. You can follow us on Twitter at Fantasy REG Draft, or a lot of folks like to drop us a note at support@fantasyrugbydraft.com at the moment. They like to do things behind closed doors before their draft, understandably. Setting the tone, Reg, how did you do in the Green and Gold Fantasy Rugby Draft League last season?
Mate, I think I gave this a good thought today to see if I could remember. I think the sheer fact that I can't remember probably points to how well I did last year, so we might move on to the next question.
Sure. Did you at least pick your son?
Yes, I did. He came in late. He lost interest. I sent him to bed without access to the computer a couple of nights just to ensure I got the lead.
Millennials and attention spans, eh? Nice one. For those folks who haven't listened to the Green and Gold Rugby podcast, I do implore you to have a listen. It's great. There's some really good stuff about Australian rugby, but also about international rugby stuff as well from an Australian slant. It gives a good balance. I guess the other side of the Green and Gold is the forums. It's a really big source of rumour, news, and everything about Australian rugby. We love it.
Yeah, it's great, mate. It's been it's actually broken a few stories this year, so it's pretty exciting to sort of read it and see it come out a little bit later.
No, and for fantasy rugby draft managers who are trying to get that edge, trying to find that little bit of morsel, and you want to hear that little bit of rumour and insinuation, fly into that. It's great. When is the league draft this year?
Well, actually, mate, so I've set up the first league and set that date for the 14th of February, so you can tell I'm a married man with 4 kids. I didn't pick up that it was Valentine's Day. A couple of guys in the forum let me know. But we're full out, and I think someone's already set up a second league, and I see someone's trying to get a Melbourne Rebels specific league going as well, so we might have a few leagues across Gaga.
Very, very nice. Respect for the 14th of Feb. So I did a bit of a cunning plan, so my first date with my wife was on Valentine's Day, because I knew I would forget it.
That's
so
brilliant.
We work around it every year, and it's an anniversary. But I never really get whether the anniversary should be your first date or your wedding anniversary. I think it probably should lean towards wedding nowadays, right?
I think so, mate. Only because that's a date I can remember. I can't remember when we first went on a date, so let's stick with that.
Good man. Right, let's power into probably a team that's closest to your heart. Let's start with the Reds. I guess chronologically, let's look at the news. The first thing was Brad Thorne came out and said that he wasn't going to go towards Quaid. He was going to go with Stewart and Payur at the time. I guess the first question is Quaid actually technically still on the Reds' books?
Mate, I think so. No one knows. This is a strange thing. It came out in the press first. The QAU have been dead quiet about it, so there's been no official statement other than Thorne's interview in the papers. Quaid and Nick Frisby and even Marcus Van Sardi, who's the young prop who was sort of mentioned at the same article, are still on the website and the squad lists. Frisby's over in France at the moment. I think he's playing for Bordeaux as a injury joker. Whereas Quaid, I don't know if he's still in Auckland training over there with Sonny Bill or if he's back home now. Ostensibly, they're all contracted and can be called on, but for all intents and purposes, it seems they're going to be ignored. And if they can't get a contract with someone else, they'll be playing club footy in Brisbane.
Yeah, you alluded to it there. It's been a pretty amusing off-season with, I guess all you can say is that for rugby fans, the off-season is pretty long with stories coming out of Quade Cooper going to the Blues. It's just very, very amusing.
Remarkable.
I guess that probably dovetails into one of the more recent bits of news. Jonno Lance coming to the Reds. Is he in genuine competition with Stewart now? Does that kind of upset the apple cart a little bit from Thorne? He said one thing, now he's got Jonno Lance. Where do you think that comes down?
Really interesting. Look, I'm a Hamish Stewart fan, and I think Brad Thorne is a big Hamish Stewart fan. He obviously coached him in the NRC, the National Rugby competition we had last year. And Brad Thorne's Queensland Country team won the championship with Stewart playing really well at number 10. Was probably the fly half of the competition, in my eyes at least. But he's still only 19. He's still only a kid. Will probably play Australia under 20s this year unless, he's in the Reds team. I suspect they'll stick with Lance, just for that experience. The thing against Lance is his injuries. I think he hasn't had a full season for a few years now. And even his little stint over there with the Warriors in the UK, he finished early because of injuries. So he may well start. It's just how long he plays. But I think they'll have a real able backup at least in Stewart. That's the way I think it'll go. It's really hard. I mean, harking back to that NRC, and this might answer a few questions later, the combination of Tuttle at 9, Stewart at 10 and Paia'ua at 12 was fantastic. So, I'm sure he might be encouraged to keep that going, but this is Super Rugby. It's not NRC. Lance is a battle-hardened veteran. He's won a championship with the Reds. He's won a championship with the Waratahs. He's toured with the Wallabies. You'd have to think he'd be favourites to start in 10.
And I also get the opinion that Brad Thorne probably didn't particularly side with the style of play that Quade Cooper would. Jonno Lance, however, a little bit more of a percentages guy for the corners, can run a backline a little bit more consistently and probably wouldn't mind the idea of Stewart learning off Lance.
Yeah, exactly right. And the thing also, as we saw in the NRC, is they didn't mind kicking and backing their defence. And countering from the mistakes. And Jonno Lance has got a fantastic defensive game, as does Hamish Stewart, might I add. But Jonno Lance is particularly renowned for his defence.
Okay, so you think with Lance, and he's probably going to be taking the goal kicks at that point as well.
I'm not convinced about that. I think James Tuttle took the kicks in the NRC. I think he may well start there. Well, it'll be interesting. Yeah, it'll be Lance or Tuttle, but I wouldn't be surprised to see if Tuttle starts.
Okay, let me just write that down because I've got a draft on Sunday. Halfbacks that kick.
Halfbacks that kick, yeah.
Absolutely. Or even have a chance of kicking is worth taking the gamble on. Okay. Any chance that the Rebels, who I'm still shaking my head that I can't. I know that it's probably something that they couldn't avoid, releasing Jonno Lance, but man, I would have got comped for them. It looked to me as though they've released their season there. I know they've bought Jack D, and we'll get onto the Rebels a little bit later, but it just seems a bit strange. Any chance Quade go to the Rebels?
Yeah, that has been mooted on the forum. I can't see that happening. Mate, who knows?
Yeah.
I still can't get that when we don't have him. I don't know where he'll end up. He's too good to be playing club rugby. In saying that, he plays for Souths, which is a couple of Ks from my front door, so I'll be watching a hell of a lot of club footy this year if Quade's playing. It's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't really strike me that Dave Vessels is that type of coach either to bring a Quade in, but never say never, I guess.
Yeah, he's got some good young tens there. We can speak about that a bit later.
Good man. Okay, so the next bit of news
Jesus.
I think we might have literally spoke about a very similar thing about the same time last year. Talk me through Carmichael Hunt. Actually, let's not get into too much of that. Let's just go. Yeah. Who's going to go 15?
Yeah, so what we can say is we can pretty much bank on Carmichael not playing this season. I think from the whispers out of the QRU is they're banking on him not being available one way or the other. Mm-hmm. So who plays 15? That's a really good question and probably a really tough question to answer. Probably 2 weeks ago when they first signed Jonno Lance, you considered him an option. And remembering Jonno played fullback for the Reds team that won the premiership in 2011. He was the starting fullback in that grand final.
I don't remember 2011.
I've got an edge, so I can tell you the starting team, the reserves, the minutes they came on, if you like. Then we also signed Benny Lucas, so another sort of former Red player who's been over in the UK, a bit of Japan. Now, Benny's also played a fair bit of fullback for the Reds in those ensuing years when we're sort of trying to find that period post Peter Hines, Luke Morahan wasn't quite cutting it. So Benny's played a bit of fullback, so he's an option. But the latest story to come out is that Aidan Tua, who was at the Brumbies last year and had a bit of time, I think, just in Japan, is effectively not an injury replacement, but a late minute replacement replacing Carmichael. So that's how we've got that signing there. So you'd have to think Aidan will start more than likely at fullback. I'd be interested to see. I can't remember how well he did it. He's a fantastic strike power from the back. He perhaps kicks the ball a little bit too much, overplays his hand, but I think he had a fairly high assist rate last year at least. So that'll be an interesting selection there.
No, look, he came on towards the end of the season. He seemed to settle into the Brumbies role. I thought Larkin was using him very strangely. He's not that clearance kick from a restart type person. He doesn't have and he didn't really like that pressure, and he seemed to shin most of them that coming off. Use him a little bit differently, and he's a good player, I think. That's really interesting, because my first note on the Brumbies was actually going to pour a little out for Aiden Toa, so I won't be doing that. No. So Fantasy Rugby Draft managers will be rejoicing everywhere. We get to talk about Aiden Toa for another year. Okay, that's an interesting one. So, what about the wings? Because I know there's... I guess the conventional sense maybe is Parisi and Nabuli, but I know there's a young NRC fellow that played pretty well as well. Yeah,
so you're right. Izzy Parisi will start on one wing without a doubt. But I am tending to Filippo Dagunu, who's the Fijian winger. So interesting backstory. I don't know if you know too much about him, but he was in the Fijian under-20 national soccer team. Was a goalie, but he also played a bit of striker. So he's a fairly talented athlete. Has played a little bit of rugby. He was in the, I think, wider Fijian training squad. Sevens never actually got capped for them, so he's sort of one of our local development players. But he tore up the NRC. He scored some incredible tries from kickoffs and with those incredible diving finishes into the corner. He's a handy boot. He can kick a goal himself. Having played a bit of soccer, he obviously he's got that hand-foot ball connection there going. So he is super exciting. Now, a couple of years ago, we had a guy by the name of Junior Laloifi who tore up the NRC and never quite cut it in Super Rugby. So Dagunu could be that type of player. He seems a little bit classier than Laloifi, with all due respect, and he would be in my starting 15 on the wing, most definitely. And I'll be honest, he was close to being a consideration for fullback had we not signed Aiden and Jonno and Benny.
Very interesting. And he's a left wing?
Yeah, more. No, what did he play? Played right for the NRC for Queensland Country as well. Yeah.
Okay, so him and Parisi are trying to figure out which one plays better on which. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. No, that's great. We don't have him ranked. We kind of went towards the proven one, but yeah, we saw a few highlight reels of Dan and he just wasn't too sure of Brad Thorne. But it seems he's following his a fairly winning pattern of getting these guys, and maybe he's not looking at this season, or maybe not even the next season, but these guys are a little bit further afield that get those combinations together and they'll be coming up good.
Yeah, they're a young squad for sure, yep.
Moving in a little bit, so I'm going to go out on a limb and say if you have the number one overall draft pick, you might pick the centre for the Reds. Would that be correct?
I'm rather a big fan of Samu Karevi, yeah.
That's right. Number 3 in average points per game for midfielders last year, and that was coming off an injury as well. Our personal opinion, or certainly my personal opinion, is that too much opinion was made of his performances coming back from injury versus who he really was. I think people are looking at that All Black performance and his defensive performance there, which wasn't great, as the norm, whereas that's not necessarily the case. I think he wasn't exactly fit. He looks fit now. I think he's going to be devastating. What say you?
Yeah, I'm the same, mate. I think he played well last year with a lot of things going against him. I don't think he was on top of his game by any means. Probably didn't deserve to play the number of tests he did, but regardless of that, I think he'll be ready for Super Rugby. He's a big break. I think he's pretty fit in terms of injury-wise, and I know from a strength and conditioning perspective, the fitness will be there as well. So, yeah, I'm really excited to see him getting back out there, and it'll just be interesting to see how he fits into a combination that might be heavily Queensland country, him being almost the sole Brisbane City player from the NRC. But regardless, he's classy and he'd be very high up on my selections.
Yeah, we love our Samu Karevi. I think we've talked about the 10s probably enough, and you're saying Tuttle's going to be at 9.
Yep.
Does it hurt watching Will Genia at the Rebels?
Just quietly? No, not really.
Not really?
Look, not really. Will had some really good moments with the Wallabies last year, but I think I prefer Tuttle. I'm a big fan of Tuttle, and I think it won't be too long till we see him in a Wallaby jersey.
So that means you've replaced your Will Genia Duna?
Yeah, I have, mate. Yeah, I've moved on.
Put
Exactly.
It out to pasture. All right, very good. Got the Samu Karevi one. Good man.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're past Australia Day, which is a monumental line in the sand. Super Rugby coaches must be happy that only really Carmichael Hunt and George Smith arrested.
Yeah.
It's a decent result, right? Higgins got himself out of trouble, is he?
He did. No, he's fine, and actually has been talked about as a possible Reds captain this year. So
gracious. So loose forwards, run me through those.
It's really interesting. So despite putting aside George Smith's 18 days in jail for a crime he did not do in full fugitive style, I we're not too sure of his fitness injury-wise. So yeah, there were some concerns. He picked up an injury over in Japan, and he may miss a fair chunk of footy this year. I think he was back in Brisbane for a little while, doing a bit of rehab. There was fears that back injury, his career may almost be over, but we haven't heard an update on that. I guess he hasn't been back in Brisbane long enough to have another check in. I don't know how those metal beds and jail cells are for back repair, so we'll have to see how he comes back. He's a bit of an unknown quantity at the moment, Georgie, so just be wary of that. Look, if you're talking, so I think Higgins will be there, and like I say, press reports and reliable ones indicate that he's a fair chance of being captain, so you can imagine him getting a fair bit of ball. And I think he actually had a pretty good footy season last year before the June break, before injury. But I think the third person in that back row could be Caleb Timu. So right. Caleb made his debut from the bench for the Reds late last year. I think actually in the when they played the Blues and they went to Samoa, he played there. Had an awesome, again, NRC under Brad Thorne. A former Australian schoolboy player, had a couple of seasons with the Brisbane Broncos. Big, hard running, ball-playing number 8 back rower. Could play 6 as well, but I'd say he's probably got that third back row spot lined up as well.
Okay, all right. Moving in one, Lukan Tui played pretty well for the Reds and also for the Wallabies. Is he nailed on to be one of those spots, and who's going to join him?
Yeah, super player. I think he had a bit of a clean-up operation over the off-season. I think he's right. I'm pretty sure he's back training. But our first choice locks are the two monster 21-year-old or 21-year-olds that played for the Wallabies for the first time last year, Lukan Tui and Isaac Rodder. So, Lukan's a big impact player, good strong runner, loves the hit up and the offload. Rodder's a bit more of a workhorse. I think they're a good combination. They'll work well together. And, we've still got Wallaby Kane Douglas in the background. He hasn't lived up to the hope. So I think the young guys will have it for the time being.
Yeah, nice. Good person to learn off as well from the coach.
Absolutely.
I was going to just move on to the Tars now, but I guess we can cover the whole front row of Australia, all of the teams. Do we think there's anything we should know about any one of the front rows?
The only one that's worth noting is, and I guess from a fantasy rugby perspective, is Tolu Latu. I think he's I'll give you two. So Tolu Latu from the Waratahs. So he really, I don't know if there's personal issues. I think there was. He missed a few games for various reasons towards the end of last year. There might have been an attitude thing. There might have been a fitness thing. Regardless, he dropped off. But he is a super player when in form. Great at the jackal, even if that's becoming less relevant in the new form of rugby. But he's a super talented player. And, us Aussies are very envious of the skill of the New Zealand hooker that is out there. And Latu's probably our closest clone to that. So if he can get back to his full form, he'd be one I'd be looking at. Yep. And the only other one is the young guy who, if the Kiwis remember, made his debut for the Wallabies last year, Jordan Uelese, who has actually played more international rugby than Super Rugby at the moment. So he should be in the middle of a pretty damn impressive Melbourne Rebels forward pack. So that'd be the two front rowers to watch. Everything else should be, as is, I guess talk about the Reds, Taniola Tupou, the Tongan Thor. Yep. This will be his year. He'll be starting number 3, and will need to produce. And then James Slipper, former Wallaby, loose head and Queensland Reds captain, is back and fit and has bulked up a fair bit. So it'll be interesting to see how he goes as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting one with Tolu Latu because he does look like a world beater one moment, and then the next moment he's on the end of a yellow card.
Yeah, exactly.
He seemed to give a fair amount of pens away, but if you can straighten those out, then the Waratahs front row will be a bit of a force.
Yeah, indeed.
And let's go on to the Waratahs. So, I guess for us, we put Izzy at number 1, and the reason we put Izzy at number 1 was because we figured he'd be at 15 with Curtis Rona's signing. Is that misplaced, or do you think that's accurate?
No, I think that's right, mate. I think a lot of people try to shift things around and they think Izzy might be better off at 13 and do you put Curtly at fullback and all that sort of stuff. But Izzy's a fullback and that's where he does his best work, and I think that's where he'll be and that's where he'll stay. I think he was trialled a little bit at 13 again last year, but it doesn't work as well for the team. I think when he had a great year for the Wallabies at 15, and he'll be there at the Waratahs for 15.
Yeah, we did a bit of math actually in the off season, and for the 8 and a bit games, he was like 12 points fantasy rugby points. Not that this is a yardstick for any player performance by any stretch of the imagination, but it just illustrates how better he is at fullback. And then it was 23 average points per game at 15.
Interesting.
Just market difference. The only pause I would say, and I was 100% confident this was going to happen until I saw the Waratahs team sheet tonight for the pre-season game against the Highlanders. I think it might be in Queenstown, where it's got Curtis Rona on the wing.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I can't get my head around exactly what probably more the wing situation will be for the Waratahs there.
Sure.
I think Rona will end up being 13. I think that trial team was a fairly experimental side. None of the real big names playing in it. No Hooper and no Beale and stuff like that.
True.
So I wouldn't get too caught up on that team just yet. Give it a couple more weeks. But yeah, I'm with you. I suspect it'll be a Beale Rona centre combination. Where that leaves the wings, geez, I don't know. Kellaway has all the promise and was a fantastic junior player, but probably hasn't cut it yet at the next level. He's one of those guys. It's just, I always like picking natural try scorers, guys who just score tries, and he set records at NRC level, at schoolboys level, at Australian World Under-20s level. He hasn't quite converted to the international, so whether that comes, we'll see. The big fella, Takeli Nairavoro, he's such an impressive beast. He starred for the Barbarians against the Wallabies last year at outside centre, would you believe?
Yep.
He's a dynamic player, but much like sort of, I guess, Latu, you got to take the good with the bad, and there's a little bit of bad there as well.
Yeah, that's right. George Bridge won't want to see him on one-on-one again.
No.
That's been repeated. I'm sure it's been in a few courtroom sessions of poor old George. So the Alex Newsom as well is in the mix, right? So he's come from the Force. Any chance he's part of the mix? I guess it's not really clear at this stage, right? Yeah,
it's hard to tell, but I think he's a really good chance of starting, and he's a bit of a try sneaker. Doesn't mind the odd intercept as well, so he'd be a handy little low-cost outside back if you're looking at. I think he'll definitely start. Mate, he can even play fullback and outside centre, so who knows where he could end up, but a decent little player.
Yeah, but the only thing with that team is I just would have thought that Gibbo would have given Rona every opportunity to get used to playing 13 and just bed it in instead of just putting him on the wing. But I don't know. Seems that who knows really what Gibbo thinks at times. But it's good to see he's got Simon Cron there. Yeah,
a lot of people very excited about that, and Cron's been quite prominent in the pre-season. And there's word that I think Cron's on the development path in Australian rugby. He may be head coach in a couple of years' time. If it's not the Waratahs, it might be someone a little bit further south, so we'll see.
Yeah, little known fact, I actually played rugby with Simon Cron. A little bit more with his brother Chris, but yeah.
Right.
With Simon Cron, he's a year older than me, but down at Christchurch.
Yeah, right. Well, very impressive guy.
Yep, good heritage. Let's look at a little bit further in. So we've said Rona and Kirtley. Foley, top average points per game for a fly half last season, and that was without Rona and without Kirtley, and with Izzy in and out. I just think onwards and upwards. He's our top fly half this season. Any reason to step off that?
By no means whatsoever. He's the man for the Waratahs. There's no one really to compete with. There's a young guy called Mac Mason who had a few games last year, looked okay, but he's not ready to usurp Bernard, and I think he'd be my premier Australian Super Rugby 10 as well.
Yeah, plays in the Australian Conference, but also gets to play the Sunwolves twice.
Yep.
So, I'll take that any day of the week. Halfback was a little bit more of an unknown. We thought Jake Gordon was going to take that halfback spot, but then pretty close towards the end of the season, it seemed Gibbo lost a little bit of faith in him. Do you think he's going to try and give him every chance to make that position his own?
Oh, it's hard, mate. I can only assume he'll stick with Phipps again. He's still the Wallaby squad member. He's got a really strong combination with Foley. But it could be Gordon's year. Like you said, he had his moments. I think he's a super talent, fantastic run of the ball. Plays a different game than Phipps. Phipps rarely runs himself. He's a good support player. But it's all that up-tempo passing game. Gordon's sort of probably asks a few more questions of the defence himself. It's just how that fits in with Gibbo's game plan this year. I don't know. It might be one of those situations where Phipps starts and by mid-year or so, Gordon might be in there.
Yeah, exactly. And it's worth just... It might not be a great drafting on the first to grab a half-back, but if you don't grab one at all, then make sure that you're on the Waratahs team sheet for that first week.
Yeah, exactly.
Because those two, either or, are unlikely to get selected very highly in your draft. They may be hanging around.
Yep, exactly.
Loose forwards. So there's a few Wallaby loose forwards for the Tars now, knocking about. So you got Hannigan, Holloway, Hooper and Dempsey. Obviously, Hooper goes in. He's the number 5 average points per game for for loose forwards last season. Who's going to fit around him?
Yeah, interesting one. So Holloway will be Dempsey. Jack Dempsey will be out for a few more, a couple of months. So he won't be a factor. So I think they're talking April maybe. So what's that? That's 9 weeks away or so. So not a factor early on, which makes you think that it'll be Holloway and Hannigan there. Hannigan playing 6. Holloway's an interesting one. Plenty of potential there. A bit of a try scorer. But I think once Dempsey's back, it'll just be a matter of who's not performing, Holloway or Hannigan. I know Hannigan played a fair bit of test footy late last year, but I think Dempsey, proved that game for the Wallabies versus the All Blacks, where he got man of the match, that he's got something a little bit different. He's pretty hard-boned. And I think Cron in particular will like that. So we'll see how that pans out. But don't have to worry about Dempsey for a few months yet.
Yeah, okay, yeah, Holloway a bit struck down with injuries last year as well. Hopefully that was the main reason for his low points.
Yep.
All right, let's move on to the Brumbies then. We touched on Aiden Toa leaving there. So does that mean that's Tom Banks' job?
Yeah, I think so. Tom's probably the most likely. Andy Muirhead's in the squad. He's really the only fullback I can see, unless they really want to mix things up and chuck Leali'ifano back there. He's had a little bit of time in there, but I don't think that's likely. I think Tommy Banks will start. He was close to Wallaby selection last year, and he was pretty good for the Brumbies. So yeah, he'll be the starting 15.
He was pretty good at the end of last season as well. Give him a bit of confidence. Didn't exactly translate to points on fantasy rugby points, but I suspect he might be not a bad draft quite late, because he's just another year under his belt, and also that whiff of the Wallaby jumper. Give him a bit of confidence.
Yep, agreed.
One of the wings, so it was always a bit of a challenge for the Brumbies who would play on the opposite wing to Spate. They tried Jimmy D, they tried Nigel Wong, but they've bought Chance Penny, who is actually a very good player. Is it as simple as just him and Spate on the wings?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's definitely the likely starting point. I can't see anyone pushing them at this stage. There's a little bit of talent on the bench, but they'd be my starters there. There's a couple of Wallabies there, so yep, that's the way I think they'll go.
And again, playing in the Super Rugby, in the Australian Conference, a lot of people like drafting New Zealand wingers. I think Chance Penny and Spate, you probably get them fairly late as well. I think they'll go well. If they're your third outside back or even fourth outside back, you can probably snare them further. You'll go well.
Fair enough.
In one, Tavita Kundrani is just going to keep on going and going till he's about 80, right?
Yep, the K-Train, mate. The 13 jerseys his. We didn't think they'd replace Mortlock, but they have in Kurandrani, so he'll be there.
I was going to make a joke about a different type of K-Train that we talked about earlier, but we'll get onto that. So we've got Leali'ifano coming back. Great story. Up at Ulster, getting his fitness back as well, playing quite a few games up there. So do you think we're going to see the situation we had with Matt Tamua, where Haurewa plays 10 and Leali'ifano goes 12?
Yeah, it'll depend on the game plan. I think so. Haurewa had a great NRC as well. Really impressed. And I think he was really finding his feet. And he's got some pretty quick feet there as well, finding his feet for the Brumbies and then the Vikings in the NRC. I think that's a fair bet, but, people still rate Kyle Godwin highly. And, he had a great year a couple of years ago. He hasn't quite reproduced. He's still a very solid footballer. I'm really intrigued by this one. It's how Leali'ifano is only just back with the team now, having come back from the UK, so it's how he pulls up. He'll definitely be in the team. I can't quite work out whether he'll be at 10 or 12. I guess it's that'll be the influence of even Larkin, while he's not coaching the team, he might have a bit of a say on that. But new coach Dan McKellar, we'll see which way he's thinking pretty quickly.
Yeah, I was gonna put a gun to your head and figure out which one of those is going to be 10 and 12 and who's going to be kicking. But
if I was selecting, I'd be Leali'ifano 10 and Godwin at 12.
Okay, all right, fair.
And that's not just an anti-Kiwi thing, mate.
Yeah, we've heard your story about Project Taste. For those of you who want to look at the Green and Gold back catalogue. I guess one of the biggest signings for the Brumbies is, and we've talked about this maybe a couple of seasons ago, is they've been trying to replace Itava'a and that big ball carrying 8. Have they found it in Isan Nasarani?
Absolutely. Signing of the season. Of all the Force players I wanted the Reds to sign, and we didn't sign anyone, it was this guy. He was a standout in the NRC 2 years ago. He got pretty much, I think he was player of the season. He was then got signed by the Force, and he was their player of the season last year. For a guy that just was starting Super Rugby, he was outstanding, a constant meter gainer. He's the number 8 Australian Rugby has been looking for a number of years. There's still a bit of confusion as to when he's eligible. It might not be for another year, but yet. But as soon as he is, he'll be in that Wallaby squad, and the best we've had since potentially, the most significant number 8 ball carrier we've had since Dottai, Kefu. Yep. But he'll super exciting for the Brumbies and makes a very damaging back row for them, albeit the fact that they've suffered a blow with David Pocock likely out for 3 months potentially.
Is that a bulldozer track that's just gone over him, or what injury is that?
Mate, this is the bone of much contention because, as you may recall, Pocock had a sabbatical last year. So basically, Australian Rugby paid for him to have a year off. It was a negotiated deal. He got paid for 2 years over 3. Mm-hmm. But he didn't play rugby last year. He had a Japanese off season. Just came back and decided now was the time to have surgery. Many of an Australian Rugby would have liked to think that perhaps he would have done it last year when he wasn't playing rugby, or perhaps he might have missed the Japanese season. But as it turns out, he'll be missing 3 months of the Super Rugby season.
I was leading the witness then. Yes, absolutely. I was a bit surprised about the timing of his surgery as well.
Yeah. So what it does, it's interesting, where that leaves. That was a potentially fantastic back row there with, Izzy, Pocock, and this young guy called Robert Ballatini. So this guy's a monster. He's in the Australian Under-20s last year. He is huge. He is a very exciting young player. Whether you'd like to think he makes a squad. Pocock's an open side, so they might look at Tom Cusack, who was captain of the Canberra Vikings team in the NRC and was one of the best all season. So Cusack might provide that open side cover. Ballatini might be there as well. And that's a dynamic back row. That's a ball running, hard working, very physical. They do run the ball, but they don't shirk the hard work there. That's a really exciting back row the Brumbies could have on the field for that season, regardless of David Pocock.
Valentini was my next question. So one of our more shrewd managers in our draft last week took him very, very late. And there was a few kind of chortles around the table at the time, but it wasn't a chortle from me because I'd known that this was there. He's listed as a lock in the game as well. Yep. So if he's going to play blindside, definitely keep that under your belt.
Scores a few tries too.
Yeah, exactly. So even more the point, player out of position, need to get a lock. Played Thompson, Fafita, and then you're probably looking at Valentino if he certainly gets that start. Any more from the Brumbies?
No, I think that's they're a really strong team. They've got a world class front row, at least in the props, and Alatoa and Sia. That's not a big factor, but I think we hit on the big ones there. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Man Ray actually is a bit of a ball carrier as well. When he was coming on last season, he did some pretty impressive runs.
Yeah, it was always a bit of a go-to, the Brumby hooker, because they tend to score a few tries. The Brumbies don't mind the driving more from the line. Again, new coaches here. Let's see what they're going to do, mate. But they've got probably the tallest line out of, at least in Australia, with Rory Arnold, his twin, Richie Arnold, Sam Carner, Blake Enover. That's 3 Wallabies alone just there. And Darcy Swain, this young under-20, who's another 2 metre plus monster. So they've got plenty of talent in the line out. Why wouldn't they use it?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's move on to the Rebels. This is probably the most change. We touched on Jonno Lance there. For mine, that's a massive blow. They've done some magnificent recruiting, but they're now looking at some sort of competition between Taylor Adams and Jack D, two kind of unproven or average Super Rugby talents. Vessel's a shrewd operator, though. Do you think he's looking for someone, or he's going to go with those two?
Yeah, I don't know. Look, so the stories coming out of Rebels training, and we'll call them the Western Rebels because they're very much an amalgam of the Force and the Rebels, that they've tried a few people at training. So they have tried Taylor Adams, who's a Kiwi. I guess the Kiwis will know him, but he's been
originally a scrum half, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Right? Yeah, absolutely correct. But he's lit up club rugby. He got the Player of the Year in Sydney Club Rugby last year. Was fantastic in the NRC last year. I know I said Hamish Stewart was probably the best 10. Probably Taylor Adams was the closest to him.
Okay.
And has been signed by the Rebels for his first pro contract, at least here in Australia. So he's been trialled there. They've got a young guy called Jack McGregor who's probably, under 20s, but a decent talent. They've actually run Reece Hodge there at 10 in training, I'm led to believe. But also, very interesting from my perspective, Jack Maddox, who's the young fullback, who's a superstar of the future, had played a bit of fly half at school, I'm led to believe. So it might be almost a Steve Larkham type scenario. So really unclear. Can't give you any clarity there because they've got probably three options on the same rung in terms of, and then Jack Debrezina, he came in late. And so I take that back. Jack Deb's probably the favourite. I know, I maintain he's, now that Quade's gone, he's probably the most naturally talented fly half in Australian rugby. He's had some highs. He hasn't sort of replicated those. And probably hasn't produced them how he'd like at Super Rugby. I'd like to think a lot of that's put down to coaching, so I'm hopeful of Dave Blood Vessels getting that out of him, and I'd love to see him running around with the forward pack in front of him that he's going to have and the backs outside him that he's going to have, because it could do anything. Yeah,
that's true, and I think a lot probably going to rely on Guinea now, which isn't a bad thing, I guess, but to me, is there any reason to suggest there's anything other than a downtick for Naivalu, Koroibete and Dane Halipeti? I mean, it just seems like with Lance there, he plays a certain type of game as well that does get a lot of those guys involved, and it's a lot of ball in hand as well as being able to steer around the park. I'm not sure about the other two.
Yeah, I don't know, mate. Jack Deb's got a great wide passing game. I think he's got the potential there. Adams is a nice attacking player. It's what Vessels reckons he can get out of them. Look, it'll be interesting. I get what you're saying. I can't see us having a back three of Naivalu, Koroibete and Dane Halipeti and not getting them the ball.
Okay. Yep. And we think that's probably the likely back three?
Yeah, mate. It's what I'd pick. I can't imagine him. Injury aside, I think Naivalu's coming back from injury. Sure. I don't know how far away he is. I think he's expected back by the start of the season, but that'd be the back three I'd be looking at. Yeah, definitely.
It's a bit of a shame for Tom English, right? That guy just keeps on putting on performances when he plays.
Yeah. Super talent. Great clubman too.
Yeah, absolutely. So any chance he shifts in, or do we think it's probably going to be a combination of Meeks and Hodge in the midfield, another signing from the Force?
Yeah, mate, that's the way I'd be looking. I think the Hodge, and then either way around, I think Hodge might be 12 and Meeks 13, but I guess they can alternate. They've both played the other positions as well, but I'd suggest they'll be your centres, unless Hodge plays 10, but I think it'll be a Hodge-Meeks centre combination.
Sure. I guess Hodge was always in line to take well, there was a chance he was going to take a few of the kicks before the Lance news. It seems to me like there's an increased chance that he might take more of the kicks and even have the full-time job now. Is that
Yeah, and again, Jack Deb's a very decent kicker. I get the feeling that Reece will put his hand up and want more responsibility around the kicking. He's obviously more known for his long kicking game. He did some really good stuff for the Wallabies last year. Just natural, I think, versus Japan, he kicked a great number of goals, which was great, normal sort of conversions. So I suspect, he'll get the top job because it'll be part of his, strengthening his kit badge for the Wallaby gig.
Yeah, there aren't many midfielders in fantasy rugby draft anymore that are actually kicking. So worth keeping that in mind come draft. So he'll be one of the first few rounds off, I would have thought. We touched on Will Genia. He looks to be in a little bit of form towards the end of last season. He didn't seem as though when he first came back that he was in, maybe it was fitness, not too sure, maybe he was just getting used to being in a different way from where he was. But what do we think of Genia this season? All impressing big things?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he's a class player, and we did see plenty of his class last year. It's interesting. I don't know if many of your listeners have listened to any of the times we've had Ben Darwin on or any of the podcasts Ben Darwin's on. He's a bit of a believer of players taking a couple of years to find their groove in a new club, getting used to a new coach, new players and all that sort of stuff. Genny's obviously been around. He's got a lot more of experience that might expedite that. But, this is a very strong Force feel to it. It's got a very strong, Rebels feel to it. He's pretty much the lone outsider as it stands. It'll be fascinating to watch to see how he goes. The other only dynamic, and I'm not suggesting for a second the Wallaby halfback won't be the Rebels halfback, but Vessels has gone out of his way to bring over Michael Ruru from the Western Force, who has been excellent for them and the Perth Spirit in the NRC. And I know he's a big fan of Ruru to the extent that Nick Sturzaker, a long-term Melbourne Rebels man, has hit the road. So it's interesting to see how that plays out.
Absolutely. Moving into the loose forwards, so Murphy was probably the one player who kind of surprised a few last season. Number 3 in average points per game for a loose forward. He was storming. He just looked unbeatable at times. He's one of those kind of players that drags people, stops, starts, and then drags a few more people along the way. Very impressive. But who else is going to play with him? Who's going to be in that loose forward? Do they really solve their open side?
No, that's an interesting one. So Lepeti Tamani will probably be there. Whether he deserves it, he needs to lift his game. He hasn't sort of lived up to potential, but that open side position is way open with Sean McMahon sort of obviously leaving the club. So their options are really Colby Fainga, who's a great club man and has captained in the past, and with Sturzaker gone would be a legitimate contender for the captaincy role this year. Richard Hardwick from the Force, who played made his Wallaby debut last year, made it play a couple of games from the tests from the bench. So they're probably your leading candidates. Geordie Reid is not going to be fit by all reports, but will be there just to sort of lend a bit of support. So it's Hardwick or Fainga. I'd lean towards Richard Hardwick. Whether it's the Force connection with Vessels, the fact that he is a Wallaby player. I know Colby's highly respected down at Melbourne, but I'm a big Richard Hardwick fan. I think he's a very skillful young player and very good on the ball.
Yeah, I think for fantasy rugby draft managers, they're good players. I think Murphy's the one you want to target for points.
Yeah.
All right, so that's probably, we've touched on the front row there as well, Jordan. I guess any more? Any kind of sleepers? Was I right to say that Samu Kerevi was probably going to be your number 1 pick?
Yeah.
Any other sleepers without giving out too much trade secrets?
Mate, look, and this is where heart gets in the way of head. From my perspective, I just end up looking at just the Reds players and try and produce them. So, look, mate, that Felipe Degunu, I'd be interested to see where he's ranked with you guys. If he gets much ball, he'll light the place up. And I just really like this Jack Debrasini. I just think he's a super talented player, and if he gets in the right structures, he could be anything. If he's kicking goals, the Rebels should score plenty of tries this year. He can kick plenty of goals. But I also suspect he may be in the midst of a few others as well. So they're the only 2 that might be a little bit left field of thinking that I would recommend. And and chucking Caleb Timu as another Queensland Red for you, as a back rower who will make meters and score some tries.
Nice, I like it. I think that's about the 3rd season you've liked Jack Debrasini, and I do wonder if your wife's maiden name is Debrasini.
It's got to pay off at one time, doesn't it?
Go to the well, my friend. Go to the well. Absolutely. No. Look, that's awesome stuff, Reg. Thanks a bunch for taking the time out for our managers. Much appreciated.
My pleasure, Bruce. And might I add, I think I need commendation. I don't know when this podcast will drop, but I've got through a whole podcast up until now without bringing up the sevens on the weekend. So.
I was going to start with that. I was genuinely going to start with that because I mentioned it to, I can't remember, it might have been Paul Tate. It's one of those where I wondered if Australian rugby was just going to hang up its boots for the season.
We've declared.
Yeah, exactly.
We walked away.
Yeah, we'll take our bucket and sand and take it away with us. Absolutely. No, much appreciated, Reg. This is some really good stuff. Our managers get a whole lot from it.
Thanks, Bruce. Really enjoy coming on. Looking forward to the new fantasy rugby season.
That's us for today. I'm Bruce Wilkinson. Talk to you later.
What a bust here by Green.